For over 40 years, nearly 150,000 customers and over 30,000 channel partners spanning the globe have trusted ArcServe to strengthen their data resilience, recover lost assets, and ensure business continuity. With a unified approach to data protection and recovery, world-class technical support, and the lowest total cost of ownership, ArcServe helps businesses manage, defend, and most importantly, recover their data from any situation. Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining this latest segment of Beyond the Arc. Today, we are talking about mastering crisis management. My name is Sean Massey, and I am the America's VP of Sales for ArcServe. And this talk will not be any type of sales pitch, but rather it's going to be a discussion about topics that are really pertinent to you, the customer and partner, and hopefully we can glean some information for you today. Today, as my guest, I have Marty Myers. Marty is the Executive Vice President of Customer Experience for ArcServe. Marty, it's great to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me.
All right, terrific. Well, let's go ahead and get right into it. Crisis, just I don't know. It could be a lot of different things. Right now, we've got a hurricane that's barreling in towards Florida. Certainly, ransomware is an issue that is a risk for every organization every single day, as well as other natural disasters. And when an organization finds themselves all of a sudden in the midst of a crisis, we've got to get through that. So, Marty, maybe you could just what do you think how do we prepare for crisis first?
Yeah, so I like to start at what I call the beginning. Actually, some people get into crisis, and this is very common, right? So, for those of you that are watching, if this is you, this is just really kind of a wake up call to get up and do something different. But so, generally, having a plan is the best thing that you can do. I like to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A failure to plan is a plan to fail. And many of those different cliches. So I really like to just start at the beginning with a plan and make sure that we have a good way to handle the crisis when it does hit.
I mean, without a doubt, and sometimes now there may be folks that are out there that right now that don't have a plan, and I think your recommendation, my recommendation is, okay, this should be a very high and top priority, because it's not a matter of if a crisis occurs, it's when it occurs, right? When we end up doing that. But if you end up finding yourself in a crisis without a plan, I'm just going to give you a couple, just from my experience, a couple quick hits of what you should do. Number one, don't go into restore mode right away, right? We don't want to all of a sudden just go into action. Take a beat, get organized, gather the stakeholders, and establish really a good process to be able to do that. And we're going to talk about the planning now as we kind of move forward. So, but I think that especially if you don't have a plan and you find yourself in a crisis, it's going to be important for you to take a step back and make sure that everything, all your motion is unified, right, as we go forward.
Right, and to echo some of your thoughts there, Sean, for instance, you had mentioned the hurricane that is currently bearing down on Florida in the southeast of the United States. And for instance, before you want to jump in and start executing on your plan, one of the things that you might want to make sure that is the case is that it's safe to do so. In the case of ransomware or some other type of cyber threat in that regard, you'd want to take a step back, make sure that you've isolated your systems, that you've been able to make sure that the bad actor is out of your systems and not causing any additional harm before you go in and start restoring and maybe end up right back in the same mess again. So yeah, we'll definitely talk through the planning aspects of this, but just to echo your sentiments, it's something that you want to do in a really graduated fashion.
Excellent point. And, in business continuity planning, in the formalized training that it's out there, they always talk about HR and the safety of the employees being number one. And then also when we think about about the dissemination of information, that it's really important that everybody in the organization knows how that is going to work, because you don't want all of a sudden, somebody to call, I wonder about Joe, and I call Joe's house, and Joe's wife answered the phone and say, "Hey, is Joe there?" Because no, he's not. Oh, because I think he was in the building that just exploded, right? And
Oh,
then all of a sudden, that person inadvertently now is notifying their the next of kin that there could be something dangerous there. So we want to excellent HR safety. That's really important. And planning, really also part of planning. When I think of planning, I also think of testing. Although I know over the last several months when we talk about this, I've talked about planning and I've talked about testing almost as two separate type of entities. But when you are really planning for a disaster, that encompasses the whole kit and caboodle.
that's right. Yeah, testing is certainly part of the plan. So one thing that I would say is going back to your other point, right, about knowing who is involved and making sure people are communicated to. The first thing that you need to do if you don't already have one of these plans is really to identify the person who's the key stakeholder, a sponsor, if you will, the leader, the person that can actually carry this forward and create the plan. And in order to do that, you need to have buy-in from the overall company and leadership as well. So if you are running your business, please do look at this as an essential and ensure your team is set up for success and that they know that you find this important as well. Really important to have that person that's engaged, right? So whoever that sponsor is needs to be engaged in putting together the plan, the business continuity plan, and running this process going forward. If it's not something that's really top of mind for them, you're probably not going to end up in a crisis situation where you want to be, which is being able to execute in a very clean and controlled manner. And then the other thing, Sean, is pulling together the team. So for that person who's the sponsor, sometimes that can feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. But the thing is, you shouldn't be alone in that regard. There are stakeholders from each and every part of your organization. So that could be your HR team that Sean mentioned. It could be a networking team, data center team. You could have a legal team, and really the sky's the limit. So you would want to find who that team is going to be that is going to put together and really execute this plan going forward. So representation is going to be a big piece of that. And then once you have that team together, then that's really where you guys can get together, lay out what the requirements are, what you're looking to accomplish, what the goal is, and then really start stepping into the other pieces that we'll discuss here in a moment as well.
I mean, no doubt. And a couple pieces I would just add to that is when we're developing these plans, I always recommend that the plans are being able to be developed in a way that somebody who has no knowledge of that organization at all can come in and execute the plan, because you really don't know what kind of personnel that you might have. You might have people that are impacted by the disaster. You excuse me. You also may have folks that are on vacation. Somebody that's in Ireland on PTO, and they're not going to be able to be a part of that plan if they're not there, right? To be able to do that. So we want to make sure that plan can be executed regardless of the normal personnel that happens to be there. Of course, you would have your preferred folks that would go ahead and go through that.
Yeah, and Sean, my recommendation for this is that a lot of people think of crisis as this big thing that might happen, or it's going to happen at some point in the future. But quite honestly, your teams are already dealing with smaller incidents on a daily basis. So in a lot of cases, you already have the different components of this plan together, and you just need to piece them together, right? So for instance, if your networking team has a way to handle a circuit that is down, just in the normal course of operations, more than likely you can use that exact same plan as the kind of the networking component of your overall business continuity plan. That way, the teams that are executing this already know what to do. It's not something new to them. It's not necessarily a booklet or something that they need to pull out, although that's helpful. But it is something that they're just used to, right? They're familiar with it and they can execute on it when the time comes.
Yeah. So, good, really good information there. One other piece that I would just also like to, and there's lots of pieces we're going to be throwing in, but one additional piece to what you just said too is that I think we also want to make sure that when we're in a crisis, some of these crises can be very small, as you had mentioned. We're dealing with minor crises every single day. Some of these are more catastrophic, right? With that may take days and days of recovery. We need to make sure we're planning for that too. And my experience in the midst of a crisis is that there is an abundance of people that want to help, and they don't want to go home, and they don't want to sleep. But it's really important that we have a really good structure where folks, when it's going to take days in order to recover, and we're working around the clock, that we have a good schedule, that no one is working more than 10 to 12 hours. Um, the data center I managed that had burnt down, and I've mentioned a little bit of that before, but we had one example of there where we had and we had a physical exchange server. We had two of them actually, but one physical exchange server was the only machine that was able to boot after the fire, and we immediately then did a P2V. So we actually made it as a virtual machine, and the data store was on this storage area network, that SAN. However, we had another SAN that we were going to use for the hosting side, and our infrastructure person, who was just really would give his left arm, right, to help out, but had been up for a long time, had made a mistake, after 15, 16 hours of working, and instead of preparing that SAN for data, actually wiped out the other SAN, and then unfortunately we weren't able to boot that machine back up, and that exchange server back up and redo it. So what to solve that is just to be really good, make sure that people are wet rested, and make sure that they're as sharp as they can be as they continue to execute the plan.
Right, absolutely. You never know when these events start how long they're going to take, right? So it could be something that you could solve within maybe an hour, but it could be also something that's gone on for weeks, right? So I've been involved in a number of incidents or crises that have actually spanned a number of weeks before you get to the point that they're fully resolved. Keeping people fresh is absolutely something that you should do. And the other thing is, don't throw your change management plan out the window as well. So if there are technical things that are being committed, you might want to have another engineer looking over their shoulder to make sure that they're actually doing the right thing. You get into these situations, right? A lot of people call it the fog of war, and you think you're doing one thing. Maybe you're a little bit tired from the events that happen. These things always tend to happen 2, 3 in the morning, right? You've just gotten pulled out of bed to go in and deal with it. So having someone double check the work, or even have the person, if you don't have the number of personnel available to do that, have the person type up what they're going to do, take a moment, review it, and then commit it once they know that it's the right thing that they're looking to do.
All right, good information, and not just individual things, on our servers and pieces, but we should also be documenting the incident itself, and the different types of decisions and actions that are being made. And you don't know, that may help you certainly, later on in a lot of different ways, but also in case there's litigation that comes from it. And we want to make sure that we are following a really, really, really good process that will connect everything, and we could be able to go back, especially very good in the postmortem. So because when you're all restored and you're all back up again, you still need a plan, right? And so that postmortem is going to be really important to say, okay, hey, we ran into this problem here. Here's how we fix it for the next time. And there could be a next time. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you don't want to add to the confusion. So what I've used in the past is something like Etherpad or something along those lines, where you can keep a running list of all of the activities that have taken place and their status. So you could be that engineer that is waking up, coming on to the next shift to take over for someone. Obviously, you're going to want to have a warm handoff to do that, but it would also be great for them to read through the list of activities and see what's going on. Don't duplicate that work. And you could prevent, way back in the beginning of this discussion, you'd mentioned someone from HR calling someone with the wrong information, right? You don't want to do that 2 or 3 times. So just make it efficient and make sure everyone is aware of what's happening there from that perspective as well. And I think another good point that brings us to is communication. So in some cases in a crisis, the communication is going to happen internally. So you're going to have to let a team know what's going on. You're probably going to want to let the leadership team know what's going on, maybe the board of directors. But there are certainly situations, Sean, where you'll need to communicate out to external parties. For instance, if ArcServe were to have a crisis and it was affecting our products, then we would want to let our customers and partners know that was going on, and what we're doing, and ETAs and all of these types of things. So having that planned out ahead of time is a great thing to have. And then really kind of at the pinnacle of that, if you have a major situation, could become a public relations situation. You could be dealing with the media and other people. You'd mentioned insurance companies. You talked about litigation, those types of things as well. And so really you would need to have your public relations in place and part of this plan as well, so that you can make sure you get the right information out to the right people.
And I think when we talk about those communication plans, it's my experience, and I don't know if this is true for you too, but often we're doing a lot more communication in the early parts of the crisis. Updating the stakeholders, the executive team, or the board, or the internal folks. Maybe even every hour that there's an update. But then as things start getting in and smooth, where the crisis intervention is happening, then that will then very often then get expanded, once every 4 hours, twice a day, and then eventually once a day when we're there. Has that been your experience also?
Absolutely right. And I think one of the best things that you can do is set the expectation as to when you are going to communicate. So, for instance, early on, it could be you're going to communicate every 30 minutes or every hour. In order to keep those stakeholders abreast of what is going on, you might say the next communication will be in 1 hour from now. And then that way, people don't need to pick up the phone, they don't need to call in. They can be assured that you're going to provide that communication. Now, obviously, that requires you to follow through and keep up with that. And then, like you said, as the situation progresses, it could be that 1 hour becomes 4 hours. That 4 hours may become 8 hours, and then eventually a day, things like that, depending on how big the crisis is and how long it goes on. But set the expectation and then make sure you stick to your timeline.
And I think expectation is really important, even in the early parts of the crisis being declared, especially to our external stakeholders, right? Our external customers and everything.
That's correct.
And when they all of a sudden realize that there's nothing happening, and they're not hearing anything from the organization, their mind, and it might be correct, but it may not be correct, always goes to the worst possible scenario. So good, apt, clear, crisp communication to your external folks, to the public, and then also making sure that you're saying, hey, we'll be updating again in an hour or 2 hours or whenever it is. And that also helps from a standpoint of folks calling in and interrupting the folks that are actually performing the recovery, right? We want them to be focused. We want them to be able to get through these tasks that are very necessary in order for restoration.
Yeah, and the way that I think about it is the person that's receiving that initial communication generally has someone else that they're going to have to go communicate to as well. So, like you said, crisp, clean, on a timeline, get that information out to them, give them the information that they need to pass down, and try to give as much information as you can, right? So that they know what's going on and what to expect going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just all of a sudden looked at the time, and I think I'm just gonna say a couple things to sum up. Really the importance of planning is got to be high on your priority list. If you don't have a plan already, this should be something that you should go through and go through the steps to be able to do it. You need to have a test of the entire plan, right? Of course, we're a data resilience company, ArcServe is, and that includes data protection. Think of data backup, right? That data backup, of course, you want to be testing the backup to make sure the backup functionally works, right, for a restore process. But when we test the plan, we're testing the entire disaster recovery plan. And you will encounter things where you might even say the very first time that you did the whole DR test, or the crisis test, that it fails. That's okay, as long as you take the steps that failed, figure out why they failed, put in the remediation, and then when you repeat that test, then you should fail better, if you will, right, to be able to do that. And
Mhm.
then so planning and testing, really crucial, and it's very key. And then hope you never have to go through a major crisis, but if you do, at least then you have the motion. You know that you've done it before because you've practiced it, and then it can get you to that best optimal outcome.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, Sean, is think through real world scenarios for your business and then write up your test plans around those real world scenarios, because those are going to be the things that actually hit you. And then, as Sean said, make sure you test, go through, and in our case, right, make sure your backups are working, there's no corruption, that you're able to do the restore, that you're able to meet your recovery time and recovery point objectives, all of those different things, and then wrap that up with some type of post-mortem after action review. List down the things that went well so that you can continue to focus on doing those things well, and then the areas where you need to improve, and then just make sure that you get the team back together, communicate out to them, and continue to iterate on it over time. This is generally not something that you just do overnight. It's something that builds and grows over time. Your business is going to change and grow over time, so this plan needs to grow along with it. Back to you, Sean.
All right, good stuff. Well, thank you, Marty, very much for being my guest today's session of Beyond the Arc, and thank all of you, our loyal followers, for joining in today. Protect what's priceless, and remember, data resilience doesn't just happen.